Lamar Vincent Polvey was born on April 5, 1922. He, with his brother James and two sisters, Adela and Yvonne, lived in the small coal mining town of Kenilworth, Utah. Known to everyone as Bud, he grew up watching his father work in the coal mines and serve as the local sheriff.
Lamar Vincent Polvey was my uncle, my dad's brother, and he was known to everyone, including all of his family and friends, as Bud. He really liked working on cars. In those days, having a car was a big deal, and Bud really liked working on cars, and he had a talent for it. And so I think that was what he was known for in the community.
Bud enlisted in the Army on June 29, 1940, at the age of 18. He went to California for basic training at Fort Hamilton. Later, he was one of 3 chosen to attend mechanic school in Baltimore, Maryland. His first assignment was to the Philippines, and he was stationed at Camp John Hay in November of 1941. On December 6, 1941, he took a picture of himself to send to his family. Little did he know that the next day, the whole world would change. December 7th, 1941, at 8 a.m., the first bombs were dropped on Pearl Harbor. 9 hours later, the Japanese attacked the Philippines. Their goal was to gain control of the rich supplies and resources on the islands. The Japanese needed to attack before the Philippines were prepared to fight back. They stopped supplies to the Allies and bombed the Philippines. After 3 months of fighting, General Douglas MacArthur ordered all forces to retreat to Bataan. Once all the supplies ran out, 76,000 Allied troops surrendered. The Japanese did not anticipate the large number of troops that surrendered. Within days, many with little or no food and water died or were killed. This was only the beginning of the POW deaths. They were forced to march to a number of prison camps in what became known as the Bataan Death March. Bud was reported missing in action in May of 1942. On June 25, 1943, his family received a telegram stating that Bud was being held as a prisoner of war. Bud had been taken to the Dabo Penal prison camps, where he would spend the next year and a half. It was the Japanese idea that those who surrendered would be treated with less than human consideration as an act of shame. Beheadings, shootings, and beatings were common in the POW camps. Despite all this, there were still prisoners willing to stand up to the Japanese.
Well, I think that Bud had a little bit of a rebellious spark in him, and the fact that he was willing to fight back as much as he could, and the Japanese respected him as a mechanic, and they recognized that he was able to work on their vehicles, and so they actually used him and gave him privileges to be able to work on their vehicles, and he used that as an advantage to be able to work with the resistance a little bit when he was out of the camp and given privileges to work on their automobiles and their trucks. The one story that I always heard about my uncle was he had red hair, and when he was a prisoner of war, he let his beard grow, and his beard grew really long, and it was this big, thick, red beard. And so the stories were always told to us that when he was a prisoner of war and they would have him working on their cars and their trucks, he would find ways to put supplies for his fellow prisoners in his beard and hide them. and smuggled them back into the camp. Medical supplies or medicine or things like that, he was able to get back into the camp hidden in his beard. And I just thought that was so cool and amazing that he would think of his fellow prisoners and be able to help them in any way that he could.
On August 17, 1944, the Americans bombed a nearby airfield. The Japanese did not want the POWs to know that the tide was turning. Their goal was to send the 650 remaining men north to Cebu. Eventually, a total of 750 prisoners were loaded on the Japanese cargo ship called the Senior Maru. One of the surviving POWs recalled, "They put us down in the hole of the ship, packed like sardines down there. They would have guards fix bayonets and they would lunge at us. They'd send a tin can down there for waste. And I believe it was the same can they'd put food and water in. There was a lot of crying and praying going on." These brutal conditions gave the Senior Maru the nickname Hell Ship. September 7th, 1944, the USS Paddle was on a mission to sink enemy cargo ships. It was on its 5th war patrol when it spotted smoke from the Senior Maru. At 4:37 p.m., the submarine fired 2 torpedoes that did heavy damage on the Hell Ship. The USS Paddle had no idea that they had just sunk a ship full of their own men. Out of the 750 POWs aboard, only 83 survived. Unfortunately, Bud was not one of the survivors. In a letter from the War Department, his family received news of Bud's death.
It was very hard. My grandmother, his mother, really never got over his death. I mean, you have your son who's overseas in a wartime effort, and you know he's a prisoner of war, and it's very difficult. And to finally get the word that, you know, he was declared dead as a result of incidents that happened is just really difficult, to never be able to see your son. He was only 22 years old when he died, and so he had his whole life ahead of him, and so it was difficult on the family. They were a very close family. So this was sent to his family after he was killed, and so we've had this in our family since then.
The family received a letter from General MacArthur, part of which states, "You may have some consolation in the memory that he, along with his comrades in arms who died on Bataan and in the prison camps, gave his life for his country. It was largely their magnificent courage and sacrifices which stopped the enemy in the Philippines and gave us the time to arm ourselves for our return to the Philippines and the final defeat of Japan." In 1998, the men who survived the sinking of the Senior Maru dedicated a memorial to those that lost their lives that day. Although they suffered tremendously, they fought for a just cause. Their story reminds us that standing for what is right and enduring for what is right can lead to the ultimate sacrifice.
Well, I never knew my uncle, but my whole life we heard stories about him. And it matters because he stood up for his country. He went to war and was willing to sacrifice his life for our freedoms.
In grateful memory of Private First Class Lamar V. Povey, who died in the service of his country, he stands in the unbroken line of patriots who have dared to die that freedom might live and grow and increase in its blessings. Freedom lives, and through it he lives, in a way that humbles the undertakings of most men. Franklin D. Roosevelt.